The walls are closing in on Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and this time there is no escape. The UK Supreme Court has dropped a bombshell ruling so explosive, so unprecedented, that it threatens not only to end Starmer's political career, but to shatter the very foundation of trust in British leadership. At the heart of the storm lies £124,000 in hidden financial dealings, offshore accounts, luxury perks disguised as political expenses, and a direct, unambiguous order from the highest court in the land for Starmer to resign immediately. What once was whispered behind closed doors is now shouted from the steps of the courtroom, broadcast live for the entire nation to hear. The truth is spilling out fast, and the fallout has only just begun. In a scene that stunned the country, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom convened for what many believed would be a routine judgment on electoral conduct. But as the justices took their seats, it became clear this was no ordinary day in the chambers. Chief Justice Dame Sukar entered holding a sealed file marked urgent. The atmosphere shifted instantly. When she spoke, her voice cut through the silence with the force of a thunderclap. She revealed the court had uncovered overwhelming evidence of concealed financial activity directly tied to Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The evidence was so damning that the court had no choice but to act. Central to the judgment was a glaring £124,000 discrepancy linked to real estate profits and secret offshore transfers. The court found that Starmer failed to disclose a significant gain from the sale of a family property. Instead, portions of these proceeds were funneled into offshore accounts disguised as consultancy fees, a deliberate and calculated attempt to mislead the public and avoid fiscal accountability. This was no minor oversight, as Dame Sukar declared. It was a willful act of deception designed to subvert the transparency expected of the highest office in the land. The courtroom fell silent as the Chief Justice delivered a recommendation unlike anything the UK has ever seen before, a formal call for the immediate resignation of Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Never in British history has a sitting Prime Minister been publicly rebuked so harshly and so directly by the judiciary. The ramifications were immediate and intense. Newsrooms scrambled to verify the explosive ruling. Social media erupted with hashtags like Starmer resign and courtroom collapse. Parliament was thrown into emergency mode as stunned MPs issued urgent statements. Outside Westminster, thousands gathered in protest, brandishing signs accusing the Labour leadership of corruption and betrayal. What makes this scandal even more volatile is the transparency with which the court delivered its judgment. There were no redactions, no complex legal jargon to obscure the facts. The ruling laid bare a detailed timeline of financial transactions, a comprehensive list of unreported luxury perks, and direct testimony from whistleblowers inside Downing Street. Among the most shocking revelations were gifts and donations disguised as policy briefings and party expenses. One such instance involved a lavish weekend retreat in the Scottish Highlands, fully funded by a wealthy donor, complete with luxury accommodation, designer gifts and private catering, all concealed from public records. Another uncovered a £39,000 package of high-end goods and travel services gifted to Starmer and his spouse over 2 years, falsely labelled as minor party contributions. The Labour communications team had previously dismissed these perks as non-material, but the Supreme Court saw through the smoke and mirrors. They called it what it truly was, an abuse of office for personal enrichment. Yet perhaps the most chilling aspect of the court's findings was the internal culture within Starmer's government. Documents revealed that staffers were instructed to delete email threads, avoid naming donors in official records, and use vague, generic language in financial filings. One piece of evidence aired live was a memo from a senior aide. Never use real names in expense filings, generic language only. This was not the work of a few rogue employees, but a deliberate, structured system of deception embedded at the heart of Downing Street. As the ruling reverberated through the corridors of power, opposition leaders seized the moment. Reform UK's Richard Tice branded the court's findings as proof that corruption had reached the very top, while Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey called for a snap general election. Even within Labour, cracks appeared. Frontbenchers were reportedly preparing resignation letters, with at least 2 cabinet members confiding they could no longer serve under Starmer's leadership. In response, Starmer issued a brief defensive statement denying any wrongdoing and accusing the Supreme Court of politicising legal interpretations. But the damage was already done. The court's authority was unassailable, and for the first time in modern British history, a sitting Prime Minister faced a judicial order to step down. Leaked files soon added fuel to the fire. Former staffers began speaking out, revealing a toxic culture of concealment and manipulation. One former aide claimed she was blacklisted for raising concerns over donor reporting, while another exposed weekly meetings where advisors strategised on how to spin disclosures to appear legal. These revelations showed a government operating with blatant disregard for ministerial keys, electoral laws, and public transparency. The shock was total. Starmer's image as a man of integrity lay in ruins, and the Labour Party confronted a crisis of legitimacy. Could the party survive under his leadership? Could the British people trust a government whose leader had been publicly ordered to resign? And this was only the beginning. The leaks kept coming, dragging the nation deeper into political paralysis. Emergency meetings behind closed doors gave way to public chaos. Government offices grew eerily silent as key advisors resigned or disappeared. Communications teams issued conflicting statements by the hour. The machinery of governance was grinding to a halt. Even Starmer's closest allies began distancing themselves, unwilling or unable to steer the government through this unprecedented storm. Within hours, multiple arms of the British state mobilised. The Electoral Commission launched a fresh investigation into Labour's finances. HMRC opened urgent reviews into Starmer's tax filings linked to the property sale. MI5 began assessing potential national security risks from the offshore accounts. Never before had such coordinated scrutiny targeted a sitting Prime Minister. Internationally, the fallout was equally swift. European leaders expressed grave concern. The US government issued quiet warnings and global markets trembled, with the pound plunging and investors fleeing British bonds. Starmer's desperate attempt to reclaim control came in an unscheduled press conference, flanked by uneasy aides. He insisted the Supreme Court had overstepped, claiming the matter was legal interpretation, not wrongdoing, but his defiant tone fell flat. Journalists bombarded him with questions about the undeclared funds and concealed perks, which he dodged before abruptly ending the session. His silence spoke louder than any denial. The public was left to wonder if the man who once vowed to uphold transparency was now hiding behind empty rhetoric. Then the Chief Justice herself delivered a rare follow-up statement. Dame Sukar made it clear this was not a mere recommendation, but a legal imperative. The ministerial code and constitutional precedent demanded Starmer's resignation. Failure to comply would constitute direct defiance of judicial authority, risking a constitutional crisis. The message was unmistakable. The crisis had reached breaking point. Political historians scrambled to find parallels. Some drew comparisons to America's Watergate scandal, others to the Profumo affair, but none matched the severity of a Supreme Court publicly challenging the legitimacy of a sitting Prime Minister. Legal experts warned of dire consequences. Parliament could be suspended, a caretaker government installed, or even the monarchy forced to intervene. The entire British system of governance was being tested as never before. All eyes turned to Buckingham Palace. Could King Charles intervene? Reports emerged of private briefings where constitutional advisors outlined grim scenarios should Starmer refuse to step down. The idea of royal involvement in politics, long considered untouchable, had suddenly become a pressing reality. This alone underscored how close Britain teetered on the edge. Inside Downing Street, chaos deepened. Emergency protocols were triggered as advisors resigned or went silent. Departments lost direction. The Prime Minister's daily schedule unravelled. Communications teams scrambled in vain to control the narrative. The political machine had ground to a halt. Even the most loyal allies viewed Starmer as a liability, with some abandoning ship altogether. The Cabinet Secretary publicly confirmed that government agencies severed ties with Starmer's private legal team, citing conflicts with institutional neutrality. The bureaucracy had lost faith in its leader. Parliamentary dissent exploded. Backbench MPs who once hesitated now vocally demanded leadership elections. A faction of 43 Labour MPs triggered a rarely used parliamentary ethics mechanism to bypass party leadership in response to the constitutional emergency. This procedural move, invoked for the first time in over a century, was broadcast live to a nation witnessing the collapse of a premiership in real time. Political opposition galvanised swiftly. Reform UK, the Liberal Democrats, SNP and disaffected Conservatives formed a cross-party investigative panel. Their goal, an independent forensic audit of Labour's finances and an inquiry into the widespread obfuscation defining Starmer's government. Public support soared, with polls showing over 70% of voters demanding full accountability. Major broadcasters dedicated special coverage to the unfolding crisis, and international news outlets framed it as the fall of Britain's Prime Minister. Within Labour, panic set in. Leaked documents revealed Deputy Leader Angela Rayner convening with party elders and trade union leaders to discuss leadership succession plans. Scenarios ranged from voluntary resignation to forced removal via no confidence votes. These were strategic contingency plans from a party on the brink of collapse, underscoring the severity of the internal breakdown. Meanwhile, the protests escalated across the UK. London's Trafalgar Square saw over 50,000 demonstrators demanding transparency and justice. Cities from Manchester to Glasgow erupted with smaller rallies. Legal scholars and constitutional experts warned of impending chaos. The defining question echoed everywhere: will Starmer resign, or will Britain be forced to tear itself apart first? Then the royal response came. At precisely 6 p.m, Buckingham Palace issued a statement expressing deep concern over the constitutional uncertainty gripping the nation. While carefully avoiding direct mention of Starmer, the message was unmistakable. Trust and integrity must be upheld at all times. Royal commentators called it a thinly veiled warning, signalling the Crown's readiness to act if the crisis worsened. Behind palace walls, King Charles received multiple briefings confirming the unprecedented gravity of the moment. If Starmer did not step aside within 72 hours, the monarchy would have no choice but to invoke protocols unseen since the early 20th century. The ripple effect was immediate. House of Lords members called for Starmer's suspension. Financial regulators froze accounts tied to his offshore dealings. Former prime ministers weighed in with veiled but stern criticisms. The NHS delayed critical policy initiatives amid executive uncertainty. The machinery of government, once steady and reliable, was frozen in place by scandal. Global leaders grew increasingly uneasy, with the EU seeking clarifications on Brexit talks and the White House urging transparency. Markets reacted sharply, sending shockwaves through Britain's economy. The Bank of England's governor and chancellor jointly reassured the public, stressing contingency plans for all outcomes. As the third night descended on a restless Britain, Starmer remained isolated in number 10, surrounded by aides who had lost faith in his leadership. Once hailed as Labour's reformer and champion of ethics, he now found himself ensnared by the very system he pledged to clean up. The final decision loomed. Would he step down voluntarily or force the nation into constitutional chaos? One truth was clear: the coming days would reshape British politics forever. If the British people demand truth, accountability and leaders who serve with integrity, they must raise their voices now. Share this story widely, join the conversation, because the future of Britain depends on what happens next.